On the evening of April 25, 2001, patrol cars raced through the streets of Pleasant Grove, Utah. Their destination, the Eagle Lodge parking lot, where just minutes earlier, witnesses had reported seeing a woman trying to set a car on fire.
They saw a female figure fleeing from the vehicle, and they found a burning rag stuffed into the gas tank.
But when police got there, they found a lot more than a smoldering rag.
As I approached the vehicle, somebody then mentioned that, oh, and by the way, there's a body inside the vehicle.
The body belonged to 54-year-old Mina Pahela, a successful and respected local businesswoman, shot in the back of the head.
Everybody was wondering why somebody would kill somebody who was seemingly so sweet.
Police were wondering the same thing until they began looking into Pahela's financial records.
They started seeing a chain of embezzlement to the tune of about $34,000.
The trail of bad checks seemed to lead back to Mina's friend and business administrator, Kerri Brown.
She was a very sweet woman. I loved her, truly.
But police had to wonder, if Kerri and Mina were such good friends, then why was Kerri stealing from her? And most importantly, where was Kerri when her friend was in the Eagle Lodge parking lot with a bullet in her head? Born in 1962, Kerri Fae Brown grew up the youngest of 7 children in the small town of Sholo, Arizona.
My family owned restaurants. My dad worked in a sawmill. I had a great life. My parents loved every one of us children, and we never doubted that.
When she grew up, Kerri strived for that same stability, even though by the time she was 33, she had 3 children and 2 divorces.
She was just the single mom, just barely getting by. Just trying to raise these kids.
If there were any financial struggles, we never noticed them as kids. We were happy, we had fun.
In 1995, Kerri took a job at the local police department as a 911 dispatcher. It was there that she met Matt Massino.
He was a police officer on an Indian reservation called Fort McDowell in Arizona.
The couple dated for over 3 years and even had a son together, but the relationship was on again, off again. In 2000, Kerri moved to Orem, Utah to stay with her sister Connie.
She just wanted to get away for a little bit to try and reestablish her foundation, basically, and get back on her feet.
And once in Utah, Kerri seemed determined to make a fresh start.
As soon as I got to Utah, I started looking for work immediately. I answered an ad in the paper for an activities director. I was hired the next day.
The activities director position was at the Mira Vista Retirement Center, owned by 54-year-old businesswoman Mina Pahela.
Mina Pahela was a Filipino immigrant to the United States. She had basically come here with nothing. She'd built herself a pretty substantial fortune.
This was a woman who had done everything right. She made a good living, she had a lot of friends, and she was very involved in her church. If she had a flaw, it was that she trusted people too much.
She certainly seemed to trust Kerri. From the start, Mina took a shine to her new employee.
Once I started working there, Mina and I got close really very quickly. She was very charitable, very sweet woman. I loved her, truly.
Her and Mina's relationship was just a good friendship. And Mina was happy to have someone there who she could trust, and they worked well together.
After 18 months on the job, Mina promoted Kerri to administrator.
She took me out to lunch one day and asked me if I would take on the administrator's position.
She was responsible for both accounts receivable and accounts payable, with no double checks. So there was no one to monitor what Kerri was doing. She was given total access to the business.
By then, Kerri's on-again, off-again relationship with Matt Massino was back on, and he was a regular weekend visitor from Arizona. After one such visit, Kerri found herself pregnant again. With a baby on the way, Mina began to look out for her employee and friend more than ever.
After I got pregnant, I was very ill, and so she would make me try to eat these weird Filipino foods because it was the thing that would cure me or make me feel better. And she would go buy me groceries to take home so that I would feel better.
On April 21st, 2001, Kerri gave birth to a daughter by C-section. The baby's father traveled up from Arizona for the birth.
2 days after having the C-section, she comes into work, which she described that as she was being thorough and wanted to make sure things were taken care of.
I was the only administrative staff there. I was doing everything. And so without me, payroll probably wouldn't have got done, so I made an effort to go up and get payroll to her.
Just 4 days later, however, Kerri would have a lot more to worry about than getting the payroll out. It was a little after 10 p.m. on April 25th when police responding to a 911 call arrived at the parking lot of the Eagle Lodge in Pleasant Grove. 2 witnesses had reported seeing a woman trying to set fire to a car before fleeing the scene.
There was a vehicle parked that had a towel sticking out of the fuel filler tube, and somebody had tried to burn the car.
Witnesses told police they had chased the woman, but then turned back to put out the flames before the vehicle had a chance to catch fire.
Witnesses described her, I believe, as around 30-something years old, shoulder length, brown, straight hair. She was clutching her stomach. She was kind of hunched over and not running very fast.
She seemed to be holding something or holding her stomach, but she had one arm either as though she had a bundle or were in some pain.
And when they looked inside the car, police discovered this was more than just a case of attempted arson.
A woman with a gunshot wound to their head, covered in a blanket in her own vehicle. You had a burning gas rag stuffed in the gas tank. Right off the bat, it looked like a classic case of murder.
By dawn, police had identified the victim as Mina Pahela.
It was very obvious this was not a self-inflicted wound. Someone had placed her in the position she was in the car and had actually covered her up in an attempt to conceal her.
The morning after the shooting, an employee at Mina's bank, alerted by a string of bounced checks, suggested that detectives might want to take a close look at the victim's nursing home business. The next day, detectives, with the help of a forensic accountant, did exactly that.
When they started looking into the books of the Mira Vista Care Center, they found a chain of embezzlement that was going on to the tune of about $34,000.
Not only that, some of the records appeared to be missing from the office. Detectives soon learned that only 2 people were authorized to sign checks on behalf of the nursing home. One was lying in the morgue. The other was Kerri Brown. On April 27th, 2 days after the murder of nursing home owner Mina Pahela, police interviewed Kerri Brown, the employee they suspected of stealing thousands from Mina's bank account.
They found out about this embezzlement, and so that was a clear motive for the murder, and that led them to Brown as their prime and their only suspect.
Kerri, however, insisted she was innocent. She told police that on the day of the murder, she was spending time with her family.
I thought we'd take my son out to Utah Lake and play at the park and stuff.
And according to Kerri, at the time witnesses had seen someone running away from Mina's car, she was shopping at Target. When questioned about the embezzlement, however, Kerri was a little less cooperative.
She was deceptive. She would avoid answering questions. She would never volunteer any information.
Days later, armed with a warrant, detectives searched Kerri's house, hoping to find more information than Kerri was willing to provide on Mira Vista Retirement Center's finances. They found what they were looking for.
They served a search warrant on Kerri's house and found some of the records there.
And it wasn't just the missing financial records that detectives seized from the house. Thanks to a photo taken at Utah Lake, police were able to identify the clothing Kerri had worn on the day of the murder. They confiscated the clothes as possible evidence. On May 11th, Utah police paid a visit to Arizona.
We sent a couple of our investigators down to interview her boyfriend, the father of this child that they had together.
Matt Messino admitted he had been in Utah the day of the shooting, but he insisted he knew nothing about it, at least at first.
He listened to our investigators, listened to some of the evidence they were questioning him about, and then he accused Kerri Brown of killing Mina. He made a statement that he thought she should be arrested for it.
Messino told the Utah investigators that his service weapon had been missing the day of the shooting.
Miss Brown's boyfriend saw his gun on the dresser in their bedroom just before he went to bed, just before the day of the murder. When he woke up, the gun was not there.
And according to Matt, when he asked Kerri about it, she admitted to taking it.
He had left it sitting out in his bedroom while he was visiting up here in Utah, and her story was that she wanted to secure the firearm, so she moved it.
Detectives sent the gun off for ballistics testing, and when the results came back, they were damning to say the least. While the outside of the gun had been methodically cleaned, the lab had found a trace of blood inside the barrel, and not just any blood.
During the discharge, right after that, there is a vacuum created and there's a recoil that will draw anything in the vicinity into the gun, and some blood apparently was drawn into the barrel of the gun. So forensics actually managed to take a blood sample and compare it to Miss Pahela, and they found that it was her blood.
Which meant that Mina Pahela had been shot at close range with Matt Messino's service revolver. On April 3, 2002, police arrived at the home of Kerri Brown's sister, where Kerri had been staying for the last few months with her children. On the doorstep, detectives charged Kerri with the murder of Mina Pahela and the embezzlement of funds from Mina's business.
I explained to her that I was taking her into custody for homicide and secured her in handcuffs.
I was a little shocked, to say the least. I was devastated.
Following 3 months in jail, Kerri was released on bail in July of 2002 and returned home.
I couldn't believe my mom was being accused of something like that. I mean, she was doing fine, better than she had been doing in a long time. And I couldn't even think of my mom doing anything like that.
A preliminary hearing was scheduled for October 22nd. But before then, the case would take an unexpected twist. Since the time of Kerri's arrest, a new prosecutor had been appointed to the case. And Sherry Reagan had a very different view from earlier prosecutors on just how strong the state's evidence against Kerri really was.
The Utah County Attorney's Office felt like they didn't have enough evidence.
Reagan knew that even though Mina's DNA had been found on the weapon, that didn't prove Kerri had fired it.
I dismissed it, and it was a very unpopular thing to do.
You know, we knew we could not positively put her at the crime scene. And therefore it becomes a case of believing that she did it based on circumstantial evidence and motive.
It looked to Kerri like she was off the hook.
I tried to resume a normal life. I tried to live a normal life.
But that didn't mean authorities had given up.
We were in the right place, we just weren't ready to be able to prove that to a jury yet.
Detectives first set to work trying to prove or disprove Kerri's alibi for the night of the shooting.
She said that she had gone to a Target store that would have been about 5 to 7 miles away.
Kerri's subpoenaed phone records showed she had made a call on her cell around the time Mina's car had been discovered at Eagle Lodge.
If you've got the right computer records from the cell phone company, I can say that your cell phone call was made to or from this tower at this time.
The closest cell tower that had picked up her phone call, it put her at that location near the Eagles at that time when she said she was at Target.
That put Kerri in the vicinity at the time of the murder. To further strengthen their case against her, investigators also decided to test the clothes they had confiscated from Kerri for gunshot residue.
We had some GSR, gunshot residue testing, done on the clothing she had on that day, and that came back positive.
Which meant that she had been in the vicinity of a gunshot on the day of the murder. In April 2004, she was recharged with the crime. And this time, prosecutors were determined to make it stick. Coming up, Kerri finally faces a judge, but the outcome is far from certain.
You have all these arrows pointing to Ms. Brown, but you just don't have that one keystone, that one witness that will say that she pulled the trigger, that she was the one who did this.
When Kerri Brown walked into a Utah courtroom on August 6, 2004 for her preliminary hearing, over 3.5 years had passed since the death of Mina Pahela. Kerri was accused of stealing over $30,000 from her former boss, then shooting her in the back of the head to cover up the scam.
In Utah, we have what's called a preliminary hearing. It's held in front of a judge, and the judge decides whether there's enough evidence to warrant going to a trial.
Charged with 2 felony counts of theft and first-degree murder, Kerri would face the possibility of life in prison if the judge decided there was enough evidence to go to trial. As the hearing began, prosecutors presented what they claimed was Kerri's motive for the killing.
We did bring in a forensic accountant who presented our theory that Ms. Brown was embezzling money. Check is written to, the ABC Supply Company for supplies for a nursing home, and yet the proceeds are going into an account, which is a personal account for Ms. Brown.
Prosecutors claimed that it was only a matter of time before Mina discovered what was going on. And in April of 2001, it looked like that time had come.
What we think happened is that she must have thought that Mina was on the verge of discovering the embezzlement.
According to prosecutors, Kerri offered to accompany Mina to an appointment and, using her boyfriend's service revolver, shot her in the car when it was still parked in her garage. She then drove the car to the Eagle Lodge parking lot and attempted to set it on fire. If Kerri was worried by the prosecutor's accusations, she didn't show it.
During the entire preliminary hearing, Ms. Brown was pretty cool. She maintained her composure. She was very unemotional about the whole thing.
Kerri's lawyers put up no defense.
Most defense counsel, I think, believe and believe correctly that all they do is telegraph their defense to the prosecution needlessly by putting on a defense at preliminary hearings.
Having heard all the prosecution's evidence, the judge declared that Kerri would stand trial for both murder and fraud. Kerri's attorneys knew they were facing an uphill struggle to defend her. But it turned out it wasn't just the defense team that had doubts about the trial.
They could never really place her exactly in that driver's seat. They never could place her beside Ms. Pahela in that car. And that was their main problem.
They couldn't prove that she had actually fired the gun.
And that wasn't the only problem for prosecutors. They had convinced a judge, but could they convince a Utah jury? Considering that Kerri had given birth just days before the murder, prosecutors weren't so sure.
This is an area where people value families. They have a lot of children, and that it would be very difficult for them to believe that a new mother would do something like that. We were concerned about the perception that a jury might have.
In April of 2005, Reagan approached Kerri's lawyers with a deal. They would drop the murder charge down to second-degree manslaughter if Kerri pleaded guilty.
We had a lot of discussions. The defense attorney was someone that we worked with a lot and who was trying to do a good job for a client, but at the same time, having heard the preliminary hearing, that there was a good chance that she might be convicted of the homicide.
Finally, on August 1st, the two sides reached an agreement. Kerri agreed to accept the prosecution's terms, but on one condition, that she could plead no contest.
It means you don't contest the evidence, you don't admit you committed the crime.
I just think both sides were just tired of chasing each other around, and I think the prosecution just wanted to get some sort of justice for Mina Pahela's family.
The judge sentenced Kerri Brown to a maximum of 30 years in prison.
I know my mom was innocent, not just because she's my mom. There's nothing that could have pushed her to do anything like that.
And because Kerri did not have to admit the crime in her plea agreement, the case still remains controversial.
There was a feeling that she got away with murder because in all she got a 30-year term.
Once in prison, Kerri admitted to friends and family that she had stolen from Mina.
I was forging her name, and I was doctoring the books. A couple hundred here, 300 or 400 there. I took complete advantage of that.
But she continues to insist she had nothing to do with the death of her friend Mina, claiming she only accepted the plea deal for the sake of her family.
I was tired, honestly. I was so tired of fighting. It had been going on for so long. I did not want my family going through that anymore.
It was a little after 3 o'clock on the morning of October 6, 1998, when Panama City, Florida police, responding to reports of a shooting, arrived at the home of 30-year-old Ron Stovall.
Just an ordinary working guy who had never been in any problems.
Inside, detectives found Ron dead, shot 8 times at close range.
He has powder burns in his eyes, which indicate that he was looking at his killer when the final shot was fired.
The person who did this goes in with a shotgun and puts it to his head and says the words, "This is for her." That's an execution.
But who did the shooter mean by her? And why would Ron be the target of an execution? The answer police came up with would shock the entire community. Ron's 51-year-old ex-mother-in-law, Ann Trexler.
When it came out that it was a murder for hire by a grandmother, this case just really got all sorts of attention.
Ann Trexler was born Priscilla Ann Newbern in 1946 in Portsmouth, Virginia. In 1958, when Ann was just 12 years old, her father skipped out, forcing Ann's mother to take on 2 jobs to try and make ends meet.
There were times when we didn't have enough food, and my mother would put the food on the table, and we would eat, and she wouldn't.
The oldest of 5 children, Ann was left in charge when her mother was working.
She's like my mother. She took care of me. She took care of all of us.
At 18, Ann married her high school sweetheart, Jack Trexler. Within 5 years, Ann had 2 daughters of her own to care for.
Family was at the center of Ann Trexler's life. She wore her emotions on her sleeve when it came to making sure everyone knew that that's what she was all about.
She wanted to be a stay-at-home mother, take care of her husband and her kids.
Like her mother, Ann's youngest daughter, Tina, also married young. At 20, Tina married naval officer Ron Stovall. Just a few months later, Tina told her mother she was expecting.
They were very happy, that she was going to have a baby. They were really extremely happy when Kirsten was born.
Not long after the arrival of Kirsten, Ron left the Navy, and he, Tina, and the baby moved to Ron's hometown of Panama City, Florida. But by 1995, Tina told her mother that her marriage was over.
It was a rather rocky event, not a long-term marriage at all.
Anne did whatever she could to help her daughter through the difficult time.
Anne's the type of person always wanted to help.
But Anne's desire to help Tina was frustrated by the 900-mile distance between them.
Anne made a decision she wanted to relocate to Florida to be close to her daughter and her grandchild.
In May of 1997, the Trexlers bought a house in Panama City, big enough for Tina and her now 6-year-old daughter to move in with them. Anne soon became just as zealous a grandmother as she had been a mother.
She was so wrapped up in that grandchild that she just tried to run everything.
In the fall of 1997, Tina's ex-husband, Ron Stovall, remarried. It wasn't long before Ron's new wife, Angelica, clashed with his ex-mother-in-law, Anne.
There certainly was a heightening of the conflict when Angelica and Ann Trexler got involved in the lives of Ron and Tina. There was no love lost between Angelica and Ann Trexler.
And when Ron announced that he intended to seek full custody of Kirsten and move her out of state, things only got worse.
If Ron moved and if he was allowed to take Kirsten with him, neither Tina nor Ann Trexler would have the easy access to Kirsten that they had had during much of her life.
On August 10, 1998, Ron Stovall filed a motion in Bay County Court requesting full custody of Kirsten. Ann and Jack immediately offered to help Tina pay for an attorney.
Ann Trexler had contacted me along with her daughter, Tina, to see if I would represent her in a custody battle.
Around that same time, Ann Trexler had begun to confide in her hairdresser, Kim Miller.
Everybody knows how it is when you go to your barber or your hair person. And same thing like a bartender, you talk to them a lot.
But Kim wasn't the kind of person the straight-laced, church-going Ann Trexler normally befriended.
She had a really, really bad drug habit, and it steadily got worse.
Kim's boyfriend, a small-time drug dealer named Tony Perez, also worked at the salon.
He was shampooing hair, selling cocaine out the back door.
Kim might have been an unusual choice of friend for Ann, but the two hit it off. And as the custody hearing approached, Ann expressed her increasing frustration with her ex-son-in-law in no uncertain terms.
Ann started making statements to her hairdresser that Ron had made her life a living hell and that she would be a lot better off if he were dead.
Just a few minutes after 3 o'clock on the morning of October 6, 1998, Panama City Police received a number of 911 calls reporting a shooting.
We got quite a few calls, people calling in about the gunshots, and of course we immediately responded.
Less than 10 minutes after the first call, police arrived at the home of 30-year-old Ron Stovall and his new wife, Angelica. Unhurt but in a state of shock, Angelica met police at the door. In the kitchen was the body of her husband, Ron Stovall. He had been shot 8 times at what looked to detectives like point-blank range.
He has powder burns in his eyes, which indicate to the police and to the experts that he was looking at his killer when the final shot was fired.
Angelica told police that as her husband left the house for his early morning shift at UPS, someone suddenly began shooting at him.
He's hit in the arm, and it knocks him down. But he sees a guy running at him with a gun pointed at him, so he jumps up and he turns, runs back into the house.
The shooter pursued him, forcing the front door open, despite Angelica's attempts to block it.
Angelica tries to keep him out. They're struggling over the door. He puts the gun in, and he fires a shot that misses her. The shot scares Angelica, and she turns and she runs into one of the back bedrooms.
Now inside, the attacker continued firing until Stovall was slumped on the kitchen floor. Even then, according to Angelica, the killer didn't stop.
Then what she hears from the bedroom is the killer say, "This is for her," a loud blast.
The initial investigation appeared to back up Angelica's story.
Police were able to find a number of items. They were able to find projectiles. They were able to find a shotgun shell outside.
But after the initial investigation of the crime scene, that was about all they had.
There really wasn't anything collected that night that immediately let the police know who a suspect might be.
Detectives also didn't have much to go on from Angelica's description of her husband's killer.
A man wearing a cap and I believe sunglasses with a little bit of the hair coming out of the cap.
That meant they had to start at the beginning.
Whenever there's a husband or a wife killed, the first attention is directed towards the surviving spouse. And so they did that, and they eventually found out that there was this problem in this custody issue over Kirsten.
Police learned that Ron's ex-wife Tina and her mother, Ann Trexler, were locked in a bitter custody battle with Ron at the time of his murder. Even so, police didn't consider either Tina or Ann as suspects.
Angelica had described a man that, as far as being the killer, that excluded Tina and excluded Ann Trexler. So she was not an immediate suspect.
But the question was, who would want Ron Stovall dead?
Just an ordinary working guy who never had any trouble with the police, and someone you would just think was just your average citizen.
On November 1st, almost a month after the shooting, detectives stumbled onto the first piece of the puzzle, although they didn't know it at the time.
A man who was living here in Bay County was arrested and charged with a home invasion robbery.
The man arrested for the Bay County robbery was Antonio Perez. Not long after he was in custody, police got a tip that Perez knew something about the Stovall murder. When police questioned Perez, he confirmed the tip, and then some.
He says, "What do you want me to say?" And I said, "Just tell me that you committed this murder." And he just said, "Okay, I did it." I got him to elaborate just a little bit more, but at that point he was done. He really didn't want to talk to it.
I was messing with crystal methamphetamine and cocaine. So I was already where I wasn't supposed to be. I went there and I blew his head off.
In subsequent interviews, Perez claimed the murder was the result of a drug deal gone bad. But the police weren't so sure.
That was just as contrary to anything we had ever found out about our victim.
Not completely satisfied with Perez's explanation, police continued their investigation. It wasn't long before they discovered that Perez's girlfriend, Kim Miller, had talked to friends about the murder.
Kim Miller was questioned. She claimed to know nothing about the killing of Ron Stovall.
When detectives subpoenaed Kim's phone records, they discovered numerous calls to and from a person whose name had come up earlier in their investigation, Ann Trexler.
Ann Trexler had, in fact, within a short period of time of Ron's murder, made a call to Kim Miller that morning.
To police, Ann was the only one of the three who had a motive to want Ron Stovall dead. She became the focus of their investigation.
Here's Ann Trexler. Let's pin all these pieces of evidence up and see what we've got. And so that was a major break in the case.
But police needed more than just suspiciously timed phone calls to tie Ann Trexler to the crime. On January 28, 1999, police charged Kim Miller with being an accessory to murder.
She was told, if you get convicted of this, you could be facing up to life.
Prosecutors hoped that once faced with life in prison, she would turn on her friend. They were prepared to make her a deal, but there was one problem.
We really didn't know, since she was not that cooperative, what she could tell us. We didn't want to make an agreement with her before we knew what she said.
So prosecutors came up with a plan to get her to talk without committing to a deal.
The agreement was, we'll take your statement, we'll record it. If we can make an agreement, we keep the tape. If we can't make a plea agreement, you keep the tape and we can't use anything you said against you.
It worked. Kim told investigators that Ann Trexler was the mastermind behind Ron Stovall's murder.
They told Kim if she didn't testify and tell them how this happened, she was going to prison the rest of her life.
Her main purpose was to save her hide. Exactly. So she gives us the information. Yeah, Ann Trexler hired me to have him killed.
Kim explained how 51-year-old grandmother Ann Trexler had paid her to organize the execution of Ron Stovall.
She received $10,000 from Ann Trexler and conveyed the money, or most of the money, to Mr. Perez to kill Mr. Stovall. She was the go-between.
It was exactly the information prosecutors were looking for. They cut Kim a deal in exchange for her testimony.
In exchange for that, the charge was reduced to compounding a felony, where the maximum was 5 years.
Just 24 hours later, on February 15, 2000, police charged Ann Trexler with the murder of Ron Stovall. Coming up, at trial, one of the key prosecution witnesses has a change of heart.
Did Ann Trexler have anything to do with this homicide?
She had nothing to do with it.
On May 9, 2001, 2.5 years after the shooting of Ron Stovall, his former mother-in-law, Ann Trexler, walked into the Bay County Courthouse to stand trial for first-degree murder. 18 months earlier, Antonio Perez had pleaded guilty to shooting Stovall at his Panama City home. The 54-year-old grandmother was accused of hiring Perez to carry out the execution-style killing.
In Florida, there's only two possible punishments for murder in the first-degree charge. One is death, and one is life in prison without the possibility of parole, which in Florida really means you die in prison.
Before the trial began, the prosecution was short one important witness, Ron Stovall's ex-wife and Ann Trexler's daughter, Tina. Although police determined she was not involved in Ron's murder, Tina asserted her Fifth Amendment rights during a pretrial hearing to avoid testifying against her mother. The state opened its case by outlining the charges against Ann. No one was claiming she'd pulled the trigger, but state attorneys argued she was just as guilty as the man who had. Ann, they claimed, had organized the killing through her hairdresser, Kim Miller.
Ann Trexler was going to pay her X amount of dollars, and she was going to see to it that Ron was done away with. He was killed.
Ann's lawyers argued that the entire case came down to her word against her hairdressers.
You're going to have to decide who you're going to believe in this case. Are you going to believe a church-going, honest, law-abiding woman, or are you going to believe someone that's an admitted cocaine addict?
On May 10th, the prosecution called Kim Miller to the stand. As the packed courtroom listened, Kim explained how Ann had told her about the ongoing custody battle with Ron Stovall, and that Ron wanted to move her granddaughter out of state.
She didn't like the idea. She wanted him dead.
Kim testified that she set up a meeting between Ann and a hitman, her drug dealer boyfriend, Antonio Perez.
The next conversation was discussing a price on having Ron Stovall killed.
Kim told jurors that the price they had finally settled on was $10,000. As proof, prosecutors presented Ann Trexler's financial records. Ann had withdrawn close to that amount from her retirement plan and her credit card just weeks before the killing.
$7,400 had been taken out in this time frame of the 401k. 20-something odd $100 were taken out of the credit card account. Within a few dollars of loose change, it roughly added up to be about $10,000.
Next, jurors were presented with phone records showing that Ann and Kim Miller had called each other multiple times in the weeks before and on the morning of the shooting. The prosecution claimed the records supported Kim's testimony and that the timing of the calls made it highly unlikely the two were just discussing Ann's hair.
You had calls all hours of the night and in the morning A week before the murder, the morning of the murder.
Anne's defense lawyers, when they began to present their case on May 11th, claimed that Anne had perfectly innocent reasons for making the cash withdrawals prior to the murder. The money, they argued, was to pay legal fees for the custody battle.
The withdrawals of money from the Trexler's accounts was consistent with the retainers that were quoted to them to represent their daughter in the custody battle that was imminent.
The defense also had an ace in the hole, the admitted killer, Antonio Perez. Prosecutors had originally planned on having him testify for them, but at the last minute, he switched sides and testified for the defense.
Did Ann Trexler have anything to do with this homicide?
She had nothing to do with it. The attorney said, listen, how did this happen? And I said, it didn't happen that way. I said, I tried to tell you this before. She did not pay me to do anything to anybody.
Perez claimed that Kim and Ron had a romantic relationship and that was the motive for the killing.
The first time that we ever heard the allegation that Kim Miller and Ron Stovall had a relationship was during the trial. There was never any evidence of that.
No facts and evidence, no evidence anywhere to support that.
Then Anne Trexler took the stand. Her attorney slowly and methodically led Anne through her side of the story.
Lawyer that Tina had last paid his fee to represent Tina?
Jack and I did. We gave the first 1,000 down, and then we were just preparing.
She continued to insist that she had nothing to do with Ron Stovall's murder.
Is there any reason that you wouldn't want him dead?
No, I wouldn't want him to dead. He was the father of my granddaughter.
When the jury retired to consider its verdict on May 14th, Anne's lawyers were confident of victory.
I thought we had a very solid case. They were certainly given ample enough evidence to have found Anne Trexler not guilty.
2 hours later, the jury returned with a verdict. They found Anne Trexler guilty of the murder of Ron Stovall.
Didn't seem like there was enough evidence to even convict Anne. They were going on two people who have records. They were going on what they were saying and not even any evidence.
I'm sad that Miss Trexler and me got messed up with Kim. If Miss Trexler would have went to any place else, she wouldn't be in the situation she's in now.
Most women would envy. A top scientist at a major drug company, the wife of a respected AIDS researcher, and proud mother of a beautiful baby girl. Anne was the image of suburban perfection.
She was attractive, she was intelligent, everything down to her fingernails and toenails.
But Anne's charmed life turned tragic when her husband Eric was struck down by a strange and debilitating illness.
Very violent throwing up, very violent diarrhea.
He started having problems with his vitals. They couldn't figure it out.
But when tests showed Eric died of arsenic poisoning, police began questioning those who knew him, starting with his widow.
The critical question in any homicide investigation is always, why? Why is this person been murdered? And from why,
You get who?
Born in 1970, Ann Breyer grew up in the quaint town of Spring Grove, Pennsylvania. Bright, beautiful, and blonde, Ann seemed perfect in every way.
Ann Miller grew up small town, all-American girl. She was an athlete. She was popular. She was bright.
She was also ambitious. Enrolling at Purdue University in 1988, Ann set her sights on a chemistry degree. But she found her strongest chemical connection when she met and began dating fellow chemistry student Eric Miller. They seemed like a perfect match.
Eric was essentially almost a perfect man. Outstanding student, very good athlete. Eric excelled at everything he did.
It was a pretty good fit for him. She was blonde, and it just kind of looked like Ken and Barbie.
Graduating from Purdue in 1992, Eric and Ann soon married. They pursued their PhDs at North Carolina State and moved into a comfortable house in Raleigh, North Carolina. Eric graduated with his PhD in 1998, but instead of accepting a high-dollar job with one of North Carolina's major drug manufacturers, Eric defied convention by pursuing a research position.
Rather than making big money at one of the pharmaceutical companies, he decides to take a federal grant and work on pediatric AIDS.
As Eric began his work, Ann continued her PhD program at North Carolina State. And in January of 2000, she gave birth to a beautiful daughter. But living on a researcher's income didn't allow for many of the finer things in life.
Eric wasn't making a whole lot of money as a research fellow. None of them do. And because of Ann's need to have, some of the nicer material things in life, a nicer house, nicer cars, have a boat, things like that. She went to work.
Ann abandoned her PhD and used her master's degree in biochemistry to get exactly the type of high-paying job Eric had turned down. She went to work as a research scientist for one of the area's top pharmaceutical companies, and she quickly put her new salary to work.
She had some, cosmetic surgery on her chest, and she also had lots of other kind of beauty treatments.
Her outer appearance was very important to her, how she dressed, her makeup, her hair, everything down to her fingernails and toenails.
Ann quickly became close friends with several of her co-workers. She was especially close to a married research scientist named Daryl Willard.
They were colleagues. They worked side by side.
Soon, Ann was spending more and more time with Daryl and her co-workers after work. And it wasn't long before she wanted to share her new friends with her husband. On the night of November 15th, Eric Miller met up with Daryl Willard and a group of Ann's male co-workers for a guys' night out at a local bowling alley. They ordered a round of beer and hot dogs and hit the lanes.
Eric tastes his beer and says, this beer tastes kind of funky. The other co-worker, who had already, sipped some of his beer, said, hey, that's just bowling alley beer.
But midway through the game, Eric was suddenly struck by a bizarre and painful stomach ailment.
Eric Miller became violently ill.
He's having to bowl with one hand and puke into a trash can with the other.
At first, everyone assumed Eric had come down with a nasty case of food poisoning. But later that night, when his condition began to rapidly worsen, Ann drove him to the hospital. There, Eric's health continued to deteriorate. Doctors ran multiple tests, but were hard-pressed to find a cause for his illness.
Nobody's got a clue as to what's going on. Eric really took good care of himself. Good food, plenty exercise, it's just a mystery as to why this kid is so sick.
With Ann by his side, Eric stayed in the hospital for 10 days. Finally, on November 24th, his condition began to improve. With doctors' consent, he went home to the care of his wife. But just 6 days after his homecoming, on November 30th, Eric grew sick again after eating dinner. Anne rushed Eric back to the hospital, but his condition was soon worse than ever.
He started having problems with his vitals. They couldn't figure it out.
He started to hallucinate, and they had to put him in physical restraints in the bed. He literally was thrashing on the table.
The following evening, Eric's doctors received the results for the final test run during Eric's hospital stay a week earlier. Those results finally revealed the source of Eric's illness.
The reports come back, they're saying, hey, this is arsenic.
They determined, based on those test results, hey, this guy's got huge amounts of arsenic. Way larger amounts of arsenic than you can expect from any source other than somebody intentionally giving him arsenic in an effort to poison it.
The hospital immediately contacted the Raleigh Police Department with the information. But by the time detectives arrived at the hospital, it was too late.
Unfortunately, around 2 a.m., Eric died as a result of the arsenic poisoning.
The next morning, both Eric's and Anne's families gathered at her home as she began making funeral arrangements for her late husband. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Raleigh detectives and the pathologist examined Eric Miller's toxicology report. And according to the results, whoever poisoned Eric Miller had been doing so for quite some time.
Arsenic doesn't just build up in the body. It's something that had to be put in his system over a period of time.
There's evidence that shows that he probably had been getting small doses of arsenic about 5 months before he actually died.
That meant whoever poisoned Eric would have needed exclusive access to him for a long period of time. It didn't take cops long to come up with a suspect.
Anne is the only one that had the constant access to Eric to give him all these doses.
She was the person that was in close proximity with access to him. Each time he got sick, when she was the person who was there, that would have pointed to her being the person to give him the arsenic.
But when cops tried to question Anne, the distraught widow refused to speak with them.
She kept this avoidance strategy, and she would break down at convenient times when she didn't want to go talk to, the police.
Anne's bizarre behavior certainly added fuel to cops' suspicions, but they needed evidence to tie her to the murder. The next day, detectives secured a warrant to inspect the Miller home. Their search didn't turn up any arsenic. But cops did find an arsenic compound called sodium cacodylate at Anne's work 2 days later. Since Anne did work at a pharmaceutical lab, it was hardly a smoking gun. But while investigators didn't have any proof Anne poisoned her husband, their search did turn up evidence of something else: an affair.
When we cracked open Anne's work computer, we were able to determine, hey, this girl, she's been having an affair.
In December of 2000, 30-year-old pediatric AIDS researcher Eric Miller had died of an apparent case of arsenic poisoning. Suspecting his wife Anne was responsible for the crime, Raleigh police detectives had executed a search on the pharmaceutical lab where she worked on December 4th. They quickly found samples of arsenic. They also found something else: email evidence of an affair between Anne and her co-worker Daryl Willard.
She developed what appeared to be a romantic relationship with him.
While steamy emails certainly suggested a motive, it didn't prove Anne poisoned Eric. Digging deeper through Anne's work materials, cops next discovered Anne and Daryl had flown to Chicago together for a suspicious weekend business trip just 3 days before Eric was first hospitalized.
They took off on a Friday afternoon, checked into the Ritz-Carlton, and registered as Mr. and Mrs. Darrell Willard, spent the weekend there ordering an awful lot of room service, then flew back into Raleigh on Sunday.
But detectives uncovered the most suspicious piece of information when they questioned Ann and Darrell's co-workers. According to several witnesses, it was Darrell who purchased and poured Eric Miller's beer at the bowling alley the night Eric first got sick.
Darrell Willard purchases that beer and pours the beer, but hands the beer to each person, including Eric Miller. And shortly after drinking that beer, Eric Miller became violently ill.
We think Ann, had talked Darrell into poisoning Eric. It was almost like she sort of played around with it in the beginning, a little dose here, a little dose there, but then when it gets really into the late fall and in the winters, where she really becomes very serious with it.
On Sunday morning, January 21st, Raleigh police detectives knocked on Darrell Willard's front door, armed with a search warrant.
Darrell comes to the door and has the distinct look on his face of someone who is fully expecting to go to jail. That morning was a bright, sunshiny Sunday morning, and I felt for all the world like I was looking at a man who full well expected that the next thing that was going to happen was I was going to reach out with a pair of handcuffs and handcuff him.
While an army of officers searched through Darrell Willard's house, Detective Chris Morgan took Darrell aside for questioning. Darrell insisted he had nothing to do with Eric Miller's death, but Detective Morgan suspected he was hiding something.
I said, Darrell, I'll be honest with you. From the phone records, from the emails, I think you've been used by a woman. Darrell Willard looked up at me and said, yeah, and she did a good job of it. The next thing out of his mouth was, I can't talk to you anymore. I got to call my lawyer.
When cops wrapped up their search of his house several hours later, they hadn't found any arsenic. The following afternoon at 5:30 p.m., Darrell Willard's wife pulled her car into the driveway of the couple's home. She had just returned from work. When she walked into the garage, she made a horrifying discovery.
The very next day, after the search had taken place and the search warrants had become public, Darrell Willard committed suicide.
His wife goes to work that morning. He stays behind, and he shoots himself.
In a suicide note tacked to the wall, Darrell Willard had written an apology to his family. He also denied responsibility for Eric Miller's death. When word of Darrell Willard's suicide spread through Raleigh, Ann Miller packed her bags and moved in with her sister in Wilmington, North Carolina. Meanwhile, back in Raleigh, cops were trying to figure out their next step. Their investigation into Ann had hit a huge roadblock. Their biggest lead had just killed himself.
All of a sudden, this person whose home had been searched in connection with the murder investigation was dead.
We didn't have sufficient evidence to proceed on a charge, and so we were scrambling, trying to find any way that we could possibly get sufficient evidence of what happened.
Desperate to get the case back on track, cops went to question Darrell's widow, Yvette, the next day. In the course of her interview, she dropped a bombshell.
She said, Darrell confessed he had an affair with Ann to me. He told me that he didn't have anything to do with Eric's death, and he told me that he had been to see the lawyer, Rick Gammon, and he said Rick Gammon told him that he could be charged with attempted murder.
Confident Darrell's conversation contained incriminating information vital to their case, detectives immediately filed paperwork with the district attorney's office to obtain the information from his attorney, Rick Gammon. But Gammon refused to release transcripts of the conversation, citing attorney-client privilege.
When you tell your lawyer something, you have the assurance that it's confidential and that it will not be shared.
Undeterred, investigators filed numerous motions with the Wake County and the state court systems in an attempt to get the information. But Gammon appealed the requests at every level.
There was a long, protracted battle to keep this information private.
I had been told that attorney-client privilege was sacrosanct in North Carolina, and it could never be breached.
Over 2 years passed while the case was tied up in litigation. Meanwhile, Ann Miller was busy building herself a new life.
She purchased a home. She also got another job at another pharmaceutical company. And she married a man by the name of Paul Kontz, who was in a Christian rock band.
It didn't look good for investigators. With their case deadlocked in court, they were helpless to make an arrest. And it wasn't long before they couldn't help but wonder, was Ann Miller going to get away with murder? By spring of 2004, the investigation into the poisoning death of Eric Miller had been in limbo for over 3 years. Detectives could only wait while information vital to their case was being contested in the North Carolina courts.
We were, over a year into the investigation, and we didn't have sufficient evidence to proceed on a charge.
Meanwhile, the case's primary suspect, Ann Miller, was now going by Ann Kontz after moving to Wilmington, North Carolina, and marrying a new husband.
He was in a Christian rock band, and she kind of settled into a very domestic life.
Finally, in May 2004, the case went before the North Carolina Supreme Court. The court ruled that Rick Gammon, the attorney for Ann's lover Darrell Willard, had to reveal the contents of his conversation with his now deceased client.
The ruling was that it did not damage, injure, or do away with attorney-client privilege. It was a very narrowly defined case, but it gave us what we needed.
On May 27th, Rick Gammon hand-delivered notes from his conversation with Darrell Willard to the prosecutor, who turned them over to police. When investigators read their contents, it confirmed what they always suspected.
Darrell Willard told Mr. Gammon that he had met Ann Miller in the parking lot of the hospital while Eric was being treated there, and she had come down to his SUV, and they were sitting there, and she held up a syringe, and she said, "I just used this to inject poison into Eric's IV."
She got in there and did the fatal dose. That conversation between Rick and Darrell was the smoking pistol.
Prosecutors spent the next 6 months preparing their case for the grand jury. On September 27, 2004, the grand jury indicted Ann Miller Kontz for the murder of Eric Miller. That same day, Ann returned to Raleigh and turned herself in at police headquarters. Carted off to the Wake County Jail, her bond was set at $3 million.
Somebody asked, "Aren't you happy?" I said, 2 men are laying dead in the ground. 3 families torn to shreds. What in the hell is there to be happy about?
With Ann behind bars, police and the district attorney's office began building their case for trial. They knew they had an uphill fight. While strong, all their evidence against Ann was circumstantial. And if their investigation had proved anything, it was that Ann was a master manipulator.
She was a chameleon. She could appear seductive 1 minute, and she would look like a Puritan the next minute. And it scared me. It really scared me. Going into a room with 12 good citizens of Wake County who are still human, it scared the hell out of me.
But a jury would never hear Ann's case. In November of 2005, Ann agreed to a plea deal. Under the terms of the deal, Ann would plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and the reduced charge of second-degree murder. She would serve a minimum of 25 years in prison. With Eric Miller's family's blessing, the DA's office agreed to the deal. On November 7, 2005, Ann Miller Kontz shuffled into the Wake County Courthouse wearing a striped jail jumpsuit and shackled at the wrists. Her attorney read a prepared statement in which Ann acknowledged playing a role in Eric's death.
There was no true admission of her guilt. There was no regret. There still is no regret. The only thing she regrets is that she got caught.
Evil doesn't always appear with horns and a tail. Sometimes it can be a demure, well-educated, well-spoken suburbanite housewife who appears on the outside to be all sunshine and roses and dark-hearted as they come on the inside.
Alicia Hughes and her husband Brian were living the American dream. Brian was a former member of the U.S. Air Force. Alicia was a beloved mother of two and one of the most respected teachers in her hometown of Jackson, Mississippi.
Alicia is a wonderful mom. She loves her kids. She's an outgoing, sweet person, very smart and intelligent.
She was like the high school beauty queen. She goes off to live a life with two daughters and is teaching school.
But on June 3rd, 2004, a flurry of gunfire put a sudden and horrific end to Alicia Hughes' storybook life.
Please help me, please help me, please help me. Ma'am? Somebody shot my husband.
He was shot 7 times, but the shot that actually killed him was the one to the chest.
You know, she's gotten her piece of the American pie, and all of a sudden, her husband's dead.
But the search for an unknown intruder leads instead to the couple's bedroom.
A gun holster was found underneath the victim's bed, empty. No gun, just a holster.
A shocking arrest and a surprising legal controversy would leave everyone who followed the case wondering, would justice be served, or would a cold-blooded killer get away with the perfect crime? Born in 1971, Alicia Monique Johnson was raised by a single mom in the gritty capital city of Jackson, Mississippi. As a child, Alicia preferred the company of the characters in her children's books to that of her peers.
She liked to read books, lock up in the room. She was a real quiet child.
By junior high, Alicia had distinguished herself as one of her class's top students. And by high school, she had the charm and good looks to go along with the brains.
Alicia was very friendly, very welcoming. Just a personality, just a warm personality that would draw you in.
And no one at Lanier High was more drawn to Alicia than Brian Hughes.
He was walking down the hallway, and it was the end of the day, and I was looking out the door, just waiting for the bell to ring. And he walked by, and then he kind of doubled back, and he started smiling at me. And he came into the classroom, and he sat down next to my desk, and we started talking.
During their senior year, Brian and Alicia were inseparable.
He was real spontaneous. He was just a fun person to be around. He wanted people to laugh and have fun when they were in his presence, and you felt that.
After graduation, Brian and Alicia enrolled at Jackson State University. Alicia immediately set her sights on becoming a teacher, and she wanted Brian with her every step of the way.
I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I knew that I wanted to be a wife, and I knew that I wanted to be a mother. And, beyond that, I never really had any, greater expectations.
But after just one semester, Brian left college to join the Air Force. He and Alicia decided it was time to see other people.
They code a while and they break up. They code a while and they break up. And they kept going back together.
Although Alicia's romantic life had hit an unexpected roadblock, her goal of becoming a teacher was right on track. She got a bachelor's degree in education from Jackson State and followed that up with a master's from Mississippi College. She then landed a teaching position at a school on the outskirts of Jackson. It was her dream job.
Teaching is a hard job. You have to love it to want to do it. And seeing the little light bulb that goes off when they've, got a concept, and that makes me feel like I've accomplished something.
Shortly after Alicia began teaching, Brian wrapped up his stint in the Air Force and took a job in Jackson as a machinist. Within a matter of weeks, Alicia and Brian's 8-year on-again, off-again romance was back on. On September 1st, 1999, Alicia gave birth to a daughter. 8 months later, in May of 2000, the former high school sweethearts tied the knot.
I got married at his parents' house outside, and had kind of a garden with. It was beautiful.
Married life seemed to suit Alicia and Brian. They moved into a new house and before long had another daughter. For Alicia, what started as a high school romance had become a storybook life.
We would go to family outings and events, with my family and his family, barbecues and things like that.
But Alicia's fairy tale family life was about to come to an abrupt and decidedly unhappy ending. On June 3rd, 2004, after a night out with his brother, Brian arrived home around 11 o'clock, locked the door, and set the alarm. He was talking to someone on the phone as he sat down in the living room. Moments later, the alarm on the Hughes front door was activated, triggering a call to the house from an ADT security dispatcher. Alicia Hughes answered. Fighting back tears, she told the dispatcher a harrowing story.
Good evening. Please help me, please help me, please help me. Ma'am? Somebody shot my husband. He's bleeding. Please, somebody. Okay, ma'am, I'm going to call the police right back. Please, hurry. Okay.
On June 3rd, 2004, at 11:26 p.m., investigators from the Jackson, Mississippi Police Department arrived at the suburban home of Brian and Alicia Hughes. Alerted by a security company after the alarm on the couple's front door had been triggered, the police found Brian Hughes in a puddle of blood in the den.
As you go inside the residence, right to the left of the foyer is the den. That's where the victim, Brian Hughes' body actually was at. There was a significant amount of blood.
EMTs tried to resuscitate Brian, but it was no use. They pronounced him dead on the scene, a victim of multiple gunshot wounds.
But he was shot in the chest area, the leg, and the groin. He had thrown his hands up in a defensive mode like, please, please don't shoot me. So he was shot in the hands, but the shot that actually killed him was the one to the chest.
Investigators attempted to secure the crime scene, but by midnight, several members of Brian and Alicia's family, along with dozens of patrolmen and even a few curious neighbors, had made their way to the house.
We couldn't get to the house because there were so many police cars. They would not have seen until Bryant's mother told him that I was Alicia's mother.
Between the cops, the EMTs, and the grieving friends and family, the scene was bordering on chaos. But fortunately, Alicia's young daughters managed to sleep through all of it.
The small children never woke up. They stayed in bed asleep.
To investigators, Brian Hughes appeared to be the victim of an attempted robbery gone awry. But when they tried to get a formal statement from Alicia to confirm exactly what had transpired, she was too distraught to talk. So that night, investigators granted Alicia permission to leave the house. She washed up, gathered her sleeping daughters along with an overnight bag, and headed to her mother's house. But not long after she left, the police began to suspect that something wasn't adding up. For starters, most of the shell casings from the murder weapon were found outside the Hughes front door, but all the blood evidence was inside the house.
There was no blood at the front door or in the foyer. All the blood was in the den where the body was.
Brian Hughes defied the laws of, Newton's gravity, and managed to not bleed a drop from where he was supposedly in the foyer and to where his body was found in the living room.
The physical evidence suggested to investigators that Brian had been shot and killed not by an intruder, but by someone inside the Hughes home. But the police had no real reason to suspect Alicia Hughes until they looked under her bed.
A gun holster was found underneath the victim's bed, empty. No gun, just a holster.
The holster was made to carry a .45 caliber pistol, the same type of weapon used to kill Brian Hughes.
She was allowed to leave the home that night, and she took an overnight bag with her. No one searched it. Certainly she could have either taken the gun with her that night or hid it in the house that night and came and got it at a later date.
The police brought Alicia in the next morning for questioning. She claimed she was in bed asleep when her husband was shot. Police then tested her hands for gunshot residue, explaining that if the results of the GSR test came clean, it would officially rule her out as a suspect. On February 3, 2005, the results from Alicia's GSR test came back.
The state crime lab processed this gunshot residue, and they found gunpowder on her hand, which I believe the left hand.
But the results weren't exactly overwhelming. The GSR test revealed just a single particle of gunpowder on the back of Alicia's hand. It was enough for investigators.
Either you fired a gun, held a gun, or was close to when a gun was fired. Those are the only three reasons it would be on the back of your hand.
On March 8, 2005, Alicia Hughes was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband. On January 3, 2007, the state versus Alicia Hughes for the first-degree murder of her husband got underway. Even before it began, the trial was marked by controversy.
The defense had complained that the prosecution was striking mostly blacks from that jury, especially black females from that jury. And when it ended up, there was only, I believe, 2 black females on the first jury.
The prosecution opened the proceedings by telling the jury that Alicia Hughes killed her husband because she had learned he was having an affair.
Talking to people that knew Brian, certain people will make the comment that he was a cheater. He cheated on his wife.
To prove their point, they called Robbie Rayford to the stand. She not only admitted to having an affair with Brian, she also claimed she was on the phone with him just before his death, and that he wasn't alone.
Robbie Rayford took the stand and said, I was on the phone with Brian just a few moments before the shots happened, and I asked him, is your wife standing in front of you? And he said yes, and he had to go.
She knew more than likely that Brian was with the mistress, and I think it just absolutely infuriated her. And I think that's the night that she decided that she was going to get rid of him.
Then the prosecution went over the evidence established during the investigation, particularly the holster found under the bed and the gunshot residue found on Alicia's hand the day after the murder.
The gunpowder was on the back of her left hand, and there was no other way she could have got it on the back of her left hand. That's where you'd expect to find it when someone's fired a gun.
But the defense argued that the gunshot residue pointed not to Alicia's guilt, but to her innocence.
Understand, the evidence was that the person who killed Brian shot a .45 caliber pistol 8 times. There would have been GSR all over this person.
The defense said that Alicia could have easily gotten a small amount on her from touching her husband's body. But the prosecution wasn't done yet. Next, the state claimed that Alicia moved some of the shell casings to the front porch to bolster her attempted robbery story. And the way they were found was the giveaway.
If you stand at the door firing a weapon, a .45, the bullet gonna eject quite a distance, some feet. It's not gonna just drop right there where you were standing. So that was really, a big thing.
But the defense told the jury that with all that foot traffic in and out of the house, any number of people could have moved the shell casings.
You've got the entire family for both sides, just coming through this house. They're all over the place. Obviously, it contaminates the crime scene.
With that in mind, Alicia's attorneys attempted to convince the jury that it was impossible to derive exactly where in the house Brian was shot based on the location of the shell casings. And they reminded the jury that the state's theory was just that, a theory. And that other than a tiny speck of gunshot residue, they had no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence, and no murder weapon. On January 9, 2007, the case was turned over to the jury. Coming up, the jury reaches a verdict in the Alicia Hughes murder trial. But will it stick?
That was a big issue. The composition of the jury, whether or not they were fair cross-section.
On January 9, 2007, after deliberating for about 2 hours, the jury in the Alicia Hughes murder trial announced they had reached a verdict. They found Alicia Hughes guilty of first-degree murder.
I remember standing for the verdict, and they said, guilty. And it was, almost like my ears were playing tricks on me.
The following morning, Judge Winston Kidd sentenced Alicia to life in prison.
When they said life, I thought I would die. I had no more feelings. It just seemed like the system was working against us.
But it wasn't over yet. On February 22nd, a little over a month after the guilty verdict, Alicia's attorneys petitioned the judge to throw out the conviction, based on their claim that the jury had been unfairly selected along the lines of race and gender. In a surprise move, Judge Kidd agreed.
The judge reversed himself, which, according to the research that we've done, has never been done in the state of Mississippi.
That was the one thing that puzzled everybody, from the legal experts to the people that were just watching the trial. Everybody asked, how can he do that?
After serving 5 weeks in prison, Alicia was released on a $150,000 bond. 9 months later, on November 5th, 2007, opening arguments in the state of Mississippi versus Alicia Hughes Part 2 got underway. This time around, the jury looked more like one comprised of Alicia's peers.
It was made up mostly African-American women.
And it wasn't just the makeup of the jury that was different. Alicia's defense attorney, John Coletti, had brought in some high-powered help, Dennis Sweet. Right from the beginning, Sweet came out swinging.
This is what you call a circumstantial evidence case. After we evaluate the evidence, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna ask you to find Alicia Hughes not guilty of the murder of her husband.
With the defense now knowing our entire trial strategy, on the second trial, they geared their entire trial from opening statement on to disputing the validity of the evidence which was collected.
But there was more to the new trial than a new attorney and a new jury. After going back and interviewing the neighbors, Sweet found 2 witnesses who said they heard a car speeding away from the Hughes house right after the gunshots.
After you heard the shots, did you hear anything else?
Shortly thereafter, I heard a car skid away.
I started knocking on doors, and I found 2 people that they had heard the car pull away. But you did hear a car pull off from that area? I certainly did.
Sweet also put a lot more pressure on the police to admit that the crime scene was compromised by all the people coming and going from the house on the night of the murder, particularly when he questioned the lead crime scene investigator.
Charles Taylor is this crime scene guy. And he's just a matter-of-fact guy. You know, he's there to tell the truth. Do you have the crime scene log for me?
No, sir.
Is there a crime scene log?
I don't know.
As I was questioning him, I'd ask him his questions. This was done wrong. Yeah, it was. And that was done wrong. You didn't follow the rules. No, it didn't.
Dennis Sweet, in the second trial, very charismatic, really played to the jury, tried to be real flip in his comments, would make fun of a lot of the things that people were testifying about, and really just tried to endear himself to the jury.
Closing arguments were made on November 16, 2007, and once again, Alicia Hughes' fate was turned over to a jury.
Only way that this lady could be convicted of murder is that each and every one of you have to vote guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Please don't. Alicia Hughes did not do this.
I guess the unknown intruder ran in, got Brian's gun, said, stand there for just a minute, let me shoot you 6 times, once in the groin. Let me run back out and no motion detectors go off. What man's gonna shoot someone in the genitals? No man's gonna shoot another man in the genitals, but a woman will.
Within 2 hours, the new jury had reached their decision.
I will read the verdict as the jury has handed to me. Will the defendant please stand? We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
They read the verdict and they were like, not guilty. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, thank you. And I think I screamed. And then I hugged each of my attorneys, and I was just so thankful for that verdict.
You had a school teacher convicted of killing her husband, overturned, new trial, and then set scot-free. It was a good soap opera, put it that way. It was a... All My Children has nothing on this case.
And the case continues to be controversial. To Alicia's friends and family, there was no doubt the jury made the right decision.
The DA asked that the jury be polled, all 12 of them. So that means, every one of them had to get up and say, we not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. And they all said it with a smile, and it just made us feel so good. It was just a blessing.
But to the police and prosecutors who worked the case, Alicia's not guilty verdict was not a blessing. It was a travesty of justice that can never be undone.
She could scream to this camera, I killed Brian, and so what? He deserved it, and we could never try her again, ever.
In the upscale Dallas suburb of Grapevine, few couples stood out more than 33-year-old Tracy Frame and her boyfriend, David Nixon.
Everybody knew the couple, a very striking couple.
But the sparks they gave off weren't always the romantic kind.
I heard glass busting. One of them had busted out the side window of the house.
Finally, in the spring of 2002, Tracy's tempestuous 4-year relationship with David appeared to be over.
He had planned to move out. He had rented another house.
But after the evening of April 22nd, David wouldn't just be gone.
A Penske truck showed up, overnight.
He'd be dead.
The body had been wrapped in an electric blanket, a camping tarp, and set on fire.
Born in 1969, Texas native Tracy Frame had a fiery temperament long before hooking up with David Nixon.
She could snap real quick if you pissed her off or throw little tantrums and things like that to kind of get her way.
Although the curvaceous brunette was accustomed to getting her way, particularly with men.
Tracy is the kind of girl that when she walked in the room, everybody knew she walked in the room.
David Nixon certainly noticed the bikini-clad Tracy when they met on the lake in 1998.
David liked the women. He liked to drink. He liked to party.
A high-rolling Dallas real estate agent in the middle of his second divorce. In many ways, David appeared to be Tracy's perfect match.
When he came into a room, everybody knew he was there. He liked to be, in the middle of things.
He was very active. I mean, he had like sports that he liked to play, and, he was always constantly traveling.
That evening, David and Tracy shared a few drinks. Within days, they were dating.
It was a real rebound thing. He was married and his wife left him. A month later, he's got a new girlfriend.
The next few years were a whirlwind. Long days at the lake, fancy dinners, and frequent travel.
It was always trips to Mexico with Tracy. They were always going to Cancun and stuff.
Tracy did, however, have a rival for David's attention, his son, Nicholas. The boy lived nearby with his mother, David's first wife.
David was a great father. My son used to play with his kid all the time, and David's taking him to Main Event, to the rock climbing gym.
David doted over his son, but he spoiled his girlfriend, buying her a black Lexus to match his white one.
He was paying for her car, he was paying for her bills.
And after Tracy moved into David's $500,000 Grapevine home, he was paying for what technically became Tracy's home.
David had some trouble with the IRS and signed his home over to Tracy to protect the home from, any potential tax liens.
Once she moved in, however, friends and neighbors noticed a change in David and Tracy's relationship. They began to fight, mostly about money.
Out on my patio, our window's right there. So, we would hear fights and stuff.
She could be just insulting and, belittling.
By the spring of 2002, it began to look like David had had enough.
Tracy and David, they were heading for a split up. David had talked to attorneys trying to figure out how to leave Tracy and keep his rights in the house.
David also, in preparation for the inevitable breakup, rented another house.
He had some furniture in there, a lot of his clothes. He was planning to move out.
But before he had the chance, Tracy forced the issue. On the evening of April 9th, 2002, David came home and discovered she had changed the locks. Livid, he called the cops.
Can I get an officer to come to my house? There's about to be a domestic.
Where at?
Pecan Hollow Court.
What's going on?
Well, basically it's my house. I was dumb enough to put it into my girlfriend's name, and she has now locked me out of my own house.
Police were able to resolve the problem, and David eventually got into the house. The next week and a half passed quietly. David stayed out of Tracy's way, keeping himself busy showing homes. So busy, apparently, that when his son phoned him on Friday the 19th, he never returned the call.
Nicholas repeatedly called him that weekend, and Mr. Nixon just wouldn't, or did not pick up or return calls.
By Sunday evening, with still no sign of David, his ex-wife started to worry.
I got a call from his ex-wife. She asked me if I knew where he was because she hadn't seen him all weekend.
Finally, a little before midnight on Sunday, David's ex-wife went down to the Grapevine police station and filed a missing persons report. The report itself was routine, but the resolution wouldn't be. Less than 3 hours after David Nixon was reported missing, a man was driving down the road in Grand Prairie, a Dallas suburb 20 miles south of Grapevine. Passing a drainage culvert, he stopped the car. Something was on fire.
He saw the blaze and notified an off-duty officer that was working security at a business nearby, and that officer extinguished the fire.
The fire out, the off-duty officer called for backup because wrapped in the charred remnants of a tarp and blanket was a badly burned body. Early on Monday morning, April 22, 2002, police in Grand Prairie, Texas, pulled the charred body of a white male from a drainage ditch on the edge of town. The body had no identification.
He was found wrapped in a tarp and his body was burning.
A few hours earlier and 20 miles to the north, David Nixon's ex-wife, Donna Lella, had walked into the Grapevine Police Department. She'd come to file a missing persons report on her ex and point the finger at David's girlfriend, Kerri Fae.
Donna Lella, his first wife, felt that Tracy was involved somehow.
But what exactly was she supposedly involved in? Had David just disappeared, or was there more? A little before noon, a report came over the teletype from the Grand Prairie Police. It was about the unidentified body they found the night before.
The physical description was one that could match. We weren't real sure, so we began to work on information that would help us to either identify the body as that of David Nixon or exclude the chance that that was David Nixon's body.
But until they did, the body was still unidentified. On Monday afternoon, detectives met with Kerri Fae at the house in Grapevine.
The police told Tracy that they were investigating David being missing.
Tracy told the police she hadn't seen David since Thursday. She also said he'd recently moved out of the Grapevine house.
Tracy seemed to be a lot more concerned with making sure that we knew that it was her house and not David's house. We would make reference to, well, when's the last time David came home? She would correct us and say, well, this isn't his home, this is my home.
The next morning, police spoke with a neighbor who said he hadn't seen David in days, but said he had noticed something unusual on Sunday.
A Penske truck showed up there and it was backed up like right at the garage, and it sat there, overnight, and then it was back out front, and then it just disappeared.
What had been in the back of that truck? By that afternoon, police found a possible answer.
We were able to get dental records for David Nixon and compare those to that of the body found in Grand Prairie.
The dead man was David. And a preliminary autopsy report told police something else.
David had been shot through the side, through and through. The bullet had passed through both lungs and his heart.
An hour later, Detective Hallmark was back on Kerri Fae's doorstep. She took the news of David's death surprisingly well.
She had the response, well, how did you identify the body?
We kind of looked at each other like, I can't believe she just said that. And then she, put her hands up and began to sob.
Once Tracy calmed down, she accompanied Detective Hallmark to the Grand Prairie Police Department to make a formal statement. In the interrogation room, police asked Tracy about the Penske truck neighbors had seen parked outside the house.
Tracy said David had taken the bed with him and that she had to get another bed.
To pick up the bed, Tracy told police she'd rented the truck overnight on Friday evening. For confirmation, one of the detectives called the local Penske rental location. The story checked out, more or less. The clerk had a copy of the reservation slip for the truck and appliance dolly. She'd left behind when she drove the truck off the lot.
She left David Nixon's car there. And the lady who waited on her remembered the car because it was such a nice car.
But police also learned Tracy couldn't have returned the truck on Saturday as she claimed. According to the clerk, it had still been checked out on Sunday evening when she dropped by the store around 9 p.m.
She happened to have gone to the feed store that night to feed her birds, I believe it was. And she said that the car was still there.
In the interrogation room, the detectives confronted Tracy about the clerk's story.
When you rented the vehicle, you said that you dropped it off Saturday night. Mm-hmm. However, the lady at the business was there Sunday evening at 9 p.m. and your car was still there.
No, it's not true.
She also denied driving David's car, the white Lexus.
Everybody's lying to Tracy. I just know what I'm saying.
Tracy stuck with her story, and when she finished her statement, the police let her go. Although they were fairly certain she was involved in David's death, an arrest would require more evidence. A little before midnight, Grapevine police received a call from the manager of a local supermarket. He reported that a white Lexus had been sitting, abandoned in his parking lot since Sunday night. A quick check of the tags told police it was David Nixon's car. And fortunately for police, it was parked in plain sight of the store's security cameras.
We began to watch the video, in reverse to try and determine how his car got there.
What police saw on the tape was suspicious, to say the least.
Before his car arrived, there was a black Lexus that matched that of Tracy Fae. Before that, there was a yellow Penske moving van.
A Penske truck, which we know that Tracy had rented one, arrived on Saturday.
The black Lexus showed up on Sunday night.
A black Lexus parked near the Penske truck. A lady that looked like Tracy got out of it, went into the store.
A second security camera recorded her entering and exiting the supermarket. Then, on the tape from the parking lot, the woman could be seen driving away in the Penske truck.
She came back several hours later in the early morning hours of Monday, parked David's white Lexus there, and walked over and got in the black Lexus and drove away.
The timestamp on the security tape was 1:42 a.m. 38 minutes later, David's burning body would be found in Grand Prairie. On Wednesday, April 24th, police arrested Tracy Fae for the murder of David Nixon.
Everybody knew that she was behind it. It's up to the police now to just make sure she gets found guilty.
Coming up, the case against Tracy comes down to saving 19 cents. 36-year-old Tracy Fae was used to turning heads.
She was very powerful, confident in herself, beautiful girl. She demanded attention.
But when she walked into a Texas courtroom on the morning of March 1st, 2005, all eyes were on Tracy for a different reason. Charged with the shooting death of her boyfriend, David Nixon, she faced the possibility of life in prison if convicted. In a typical case, Tracy's looks would have given her an advantage.
A lot of people tend to judge defendants based on how they look.
But this time, the DA asked the jury to take a good look at Tracy Fae, because according to the prosecution, jurors were about to see her on the videotape evidence crucial to the case.
Watching the video, we see a woman that we believe is Tracy.
The tape showed the same person driving the Penske rental truck prosecutors believed had been used to dispose of David's body.
In addition to renting the Penske truck, Tracy asked specifically for an appliance dolly. It's our belief that the appliance dolly was so that she could move David around, because David is a big man, 6'4", 240 pounds.
The defense tried to divert attention from the videotape by attacking David's character.
The defense attorneys were trying to say Mr. Nixon was not the all-American man, that he owed a lot of money to the IRS, and he always had a lot of money on him.
The defense also suggested there were others besides Tracy who stood to gain from David's death.
Prior to his death, he took out a life insurance policy for his son.
Tracy's attorney made a big deal that somehow pointed to his ex-wife.
After all, it was David's ex-wife, Donna Lella, who'd been so anxious to find David in the first place. She'd also, as the defense reminded the jurors, been quick to blame Tracy for his death.
The main focus of their case was that Donna Lella had a lot to gain from that.
But the prosecution claimed the only reason Donna Lella was anxious about David's whereabouts was because her son was upset about it. On March 1st, prosecutors called Nicholas to the stand.
He was 13 years old. He was very calm, but by the end of his testimony, he was in tears in recalling that he kept trying to reach his father.
The boy's testimony also provided the prosecution with a possible murder weapon.
David had a gun at his home, according to his son, Nicholas. He said that he had showed it to him once and that it was kept in a safe in the house.
But when police had searched the house after Tracy's arrest, the safe was empty.
Did it end up in the lake? Did it end up in a dumpster? Where did it go?
The prosecution admitted they didn't know. But the DA also pointed out that Tracy had had plenty of time to dispose of it over the weekend. And she'd apparently had plenty of time to clean up the crime scene, too.
They searched the house. They searched carpet. They did what you call luminol. And we didn't find anything.
On March 4th, prosecutors presented David's cell phone records to the jury. Several calls had been made after his disappearance. One call in particular was to a janitorial supply company.
When we contacted janitorial supply and asked them, did you receive a strange phone call on this afternoon? They said, as a matter of fact, we did. A lady called and was asking how to get out blood.
They told her about all these different products, but they told her what she really needed, if she needed to clean up blood, was probably muriatic acid, and that they did not sell it.
But the supermarket where the police had recovered David's car did carry the chemical, a common pool cleaner. Then the prosecution played another surveillance tape for the jury. It showed a woman in the supermarket checkout line. The same woman who minutes later would climb into the Penske truck and drive away.
She purchased a gallon of muriatic acid and a bag of large heavy-duty trash bags.
The video wasn't clear enough for a definitive identification. But the woman on the tape, according to the receipt prosecutors presented to the jury, had her supermarket bonus card to save 19 cents on the purchase. And the card just happened to be registered to Kerri Fae. The defense, when they started presenting their case on March 7th, focused not on the state's evidence, but on what the prosecutors didn't have.
The whole case was circumstantial evidence. There was never blood found in there. It wasn't like she held the gun or they ever found the gun.
And someone using Tracy's bonus card to buy muriatic acid, according to the defense, didn't automatically make her guilty of murder. For starters, Tracy did have a pool, so she could have had a perfectly innocent reason to purchase the cleaner. And as the defense pointed out, the prosecution had no proof she'd used the chemical to clean up David's blood.
We did not test anything in the home to see if muriatic acid had been used.
Was it enough to raise reasonable doubt? Tracy seemed confident.
She was somewhat jovial. I think she was just enjoying the limelight.
Although, acting on the advice of her attorney, Tracy declined to take center stage.
She didn't have to take the stand as the defendant, and she chose not to.
All eyes, however, were on Kerri Fae when she stood to face the jury's verdict on March 9th.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment.
She cried. I was surprised that she cried.
For David's friends and family, the guilty verdict was confirmation of what they'd known all along.
She killed him. Everybody knew. An admittance of guilt would be nice, but she would never do that.
I think that if you were just going to randomly kill somebody, you wouldn't go and methodically think out something that intense. I'm going to kill you, I'm going to wrap you up, I'm going to throw you in a ditch and burn you and leave you there. I mean, that's pretty calculating and well thought out.
On January 23, 2004, investigators from Salt Lake County, Utah, arrived at the Nevada ranch run by 43-year-old Linda Fields.
She had cows and horses, a couple ranch hands.
The police had come to inquire about one ranch hand in particular, a drifter named Jerry Polinsky. 2 weeks earlier, police had pulled Polinsky's body from Utah's Jordan River.
The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide.
The police were hoping Linda could help them solve the mystery of who killed Jerry Polinsky, and Linda was more than happy to help.
Linda Fields met us at the door with a manila folder full of documents related to Mr. Polinsky.
She was very cooperative with the police.
But that cooperation would come to an abrupt end when the police began to treat Linda not as a helpful citizen, but as a cold-blooded killer. Born in 1960, Linda Walker grew up in Grass Valley, California. After high school, Linda went to college, got married, and had 2 kids. She and her husband also spent several years as foster parents.
She loved children. She had a lot of special needs children that she cared for. Several children. I think at one point we had 12 foster children.
But problems in the marriage eventually began to surface.
She closed the foster home and went through a bad divorce.
In 1994, newly single, Linda moved with her kids across the state line to Elko, Nevada.
Mom wanted a new start. She was ready to have a change of pace, and she wanted a new life.
In Elko, Linda landed a job behind the bar of the Silver Dollar Club, a local saloon.
She was managing there. She had a lot of fun with the customers. She talked a lot with them.
One customer Linda spent a lot of time talking to was a miner and cowboy named Vern Fields.
Vern would come in there every night after work, and he finally talked her into a date, and they dated for a short time.
The couple married in 1995. Not long after, Linda and Vern moved a few miles out of town and took up ranching.
They rented or leased a ranch, Adobe Hills Ranch.
Linda did a lot of the inside work for as far as the book work and making sure that everything coincided. All the ordering was done for the ranch, for the wire and anything like that. And Vern pretty much took care of the outside.
But ranching was tough, and the couple was always on the edge of bankruptcy.
It's just hard in this day and age to make a living ranching unless you own the property. You know, there's land's too expensive, mortgages too high, the overhead's way too much.
For help with the heavy work, the Fields turned to a series of hired hands, including a happy-go-lucky friend of Vern's named Jerry Polinsky.
They had met down in Arizona. They were both miners. He was a man of very, very little needs. You know, he didn't need much.
Mr. and Miss Fields allowed him to live in a trailer on their ranch and paid him as they could for his day labor.
But every once in a while, Jerry would disappear from the ranch.
Mr. Polinsky would from time to time leave the ranch and travel to Utah where he had lived by hitchhiking and or by rail.
He was an alcoholic. From the time he would get off work until the time he would go to work, he would drink.
In January of 2001, while on one of his drunken binges, Jerry was arrested for DUI, and it wasn't the first time.
This was, I believe, the 3rd DUI conviction for him. Under Nevada state law, he was convicted as a felon for his 3rd DUI and was sent to prison.
Before he went to jail, Jerry asked Linda to look after his affairs, especially the retirement account he accrued as a minor.
He gave Linda power of attorney to pay his bills, and Linda took care of everything.
In October of 2003, Jerry was paroled and returned home to Linda's ranch.
One of the reasons he was paroled was because she gave him a place to live and a job to have.
Back at the ranch, Jerry settled into his old routine and his old drinking habit. In December of 2003, he disappeared again on what at first appeared to be just another 3-day binge. But by January 14, 2004, Jerry had been missing for nearly a month. That morning, 200 miles to the east of Linda's ranch, a man was walking along Utah's Jordan River. He'd come looking for birds, but when he trained his binoculars on the river, he spotted something else bobbing in the water.
It looked like the back of a human head, face down in the water. Our patrol deputies responded to the scene, and along with a search and rescue team, entered the water with a raft and a diver.
It wasn't the first time authorities had fished a dead body from that particular stretch of river.
There are transient camps there, and there are, at any rate, a number of homicides, solved and unsolved, that occur out in that neck of the woods on an annual basis.
And once the divers towed the body to shore, the police added one more homicide to the tally.
The victim had suffered multiple blunt force blows to the back of his head.
The dead man's name, investigators soon discovered, was Jerry Polinsky.
Found a wallet with several forms of identification. There was no indication that, he'd been robbed.
And that wasn't all they found in the dead man's wallet.
Within his wallet was the name of Vern and Linda Fields and a telephone number in Elko, Nevada.
On the morning of January 14, 2004, 200 miles east of Linda Fields' Nevada ranch, a birdwatcher had discovered a dead body drifting down Utah's Jordan River. The body was that of ranch hand Jerry Polinsky, and he had Linda Fields' phone number in his pocket. On January 16th, Detective Brent Adamson spoke to Linda and Vern Fields by phone. They appeared to be shocked to learn that this time, Jerry had disappeared for good.
It was normal for him to disappear for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Nobody ever thought anything about it.
They told the investigator they'd last seen Jerry on December 19th. But other than a little background information on Jerry, that was all Linda and Vern had for the authorities.
Mr. Polinsky disappeared. She never saw him again. She has no idea what happened to him.
And when Linda went into Elko for a few beers that evening and spread the word that Jerry had been murdered, everyone who knew him was just as baffled.
She came into the bar where I was working and told me that they had found his body in Salt Lake in the river. And it was like, you've got to be kidding me. Who would want to kill Jerry?
The police, of course, wondered the same thing. But after a week of investigating, they were no closer to having an answer.
We spent the first week canvassing homeless shelters along the river itself, on foot and on ATVs, trying to find anyone here local that may have some information or may have witnessed something.
So on January 23rd, the investigators made the long drive out to Adobe Hills Ranch to have a look around Jerry's trailer.
We drove out unannounced and showed up and just knocked on the door of the Fields residence and made contact with both Vern and Linda Fields.
Both appeared eager to cooperate with the authorities, even if Linda did most, if not all, of the talking.
She dominated the questions. Even when a question was directed specifically to Mr. Fields, Mrs. Fields answered the question.
In addition to answering their questions, Linda gave detectives a folder full of documents pertaining to Polinsky's affairs.
She was genuine and willing to help us by providing us with these documents and forthcoming.
But even with all the help and information Linda had given them, the police were no closer to solving the case. But that was about to change. On February 13th, 12 days after his trip to Nevada, Detective Brent Adamson received what started out as a routine phone call about the Polinsky case from the medical examiner's office.
Medical examiner's office received a request for the death certificate.
The request came from the beneficiary of Jerry Polinsky's life insurance policy. But when the detectives got a look at the paperwork, the request was no longer considered routine. The beneficiary listed on the policy was Linda Fields, and the policy was worth $300,000.
I thought it was very suspicious. She seemed very meticulous about the things and the transactions between the two of them, and to have overlooked the fact that she had a life insurance policy seemed very odd.
Wondering what else Linda might have overlooked, the detectives spent the next few days digging a little deeper into Jerry Polinsky's finances. And they found plenty.
There was a lot of very suspicious financial activity that Mrs. Fields had conducted using her power of attorney.
She had embezzled quite a bit of money from him while he was in prison.
Police theorized that when the money ran out, she hatched a plan to kill him for the insurance money.
I think they were kind of in a situation where they couldn't make it. They had balloon payments coming up that they had to come up with, and they didn't have the funds to pay that.
The police believed they had found a motive, but the problem was they didn't have any evidence linking Linda or Vern to the murder itself.
The district attorney had reviewed that case, and I don't feel they felt there was enough evidence to support an indictment at the time.
For more than 2 years, the case hung in limbo as police continued to try to link Linda or Vern Fields to the crime.
I subpoenaed documents from bank records, telephone records, cellular telephone records, retirement accounts. So I spent a significant amount of time going through financial records trying to find some link.
Then, in October of 2006, police finally got the break they were looking for.
The Elko County Sheriff's Office calls, a detective from their office calls me, Kevin McKinney, and says, I have some people that have come to me and given me a statement.
The statement came from Linda's younger brother, Mike Walker. He and his wife had recently moved on to the ranch.
Linda and Vern put him in a house up on the hill that they said, you fix it up, you can live there.
But the arrangement didn't quite work out the way everyone had hoped. After a number of quarrels with his sister, including the threat of eviction, Mike and his wife decided to move out. But in the short time they had lived on the ranch, they heard some things they thought the police would be interested in.
He basically told us that he had overheard a conversation between Linda and Vern, and heard Vern say that we're going to get caught, and they're gonna know that we dumped the body.
On November 27, 2006, investigators from Salt Lake, along with Elko County Sheriff's deputies, drove back out to the Fields Ranch. And this time, they had a warrant for Linda's arrest.
We met Mr. Fields outside the front door. He actually ran back into the house yelling for Linda. We grabbed him, detained him, and then Mrs. Fields came out of a back room into the living area where she was taken into custody.
Linda was booked on charges of first-degree murder. Vern, however, wasn't taken into custody, at least not yet. Linda, as far as the authorities were concerned, was the mastermind.
She controlled and dominated her husband. She was very strong-willed and controlled all situations.
Even so, the state's case against Linda was not overwhelming.
There was no physical evidence whatsoever and no circumstantial evidence whatsoever, simply a motive.
Without some physical evidence or another witness, a conviction was anything but certain. Coming up, Linda's attempt to stay in control backfires.
She'd burn as much as possible out of it. He's talking way too much. It's going to sink me hard and fast.
On March 14, 2007, Linda Field's murder trial began. She'd spent the past 5 months in jail, but her husband Vern, who authorities also suspected was involved, had not yet been arrested.
Linda was ultimately booked into jail, and Mr. Fields, we interviewed him for some time, collected a handwriting sample, and then transported him back to his residence. He was released at that time.
Linda walked into the courtroom confident of an acquittal, and she had good reason. The state's case was conspicuously absent of any meaningful physical evidence tying her to the crime.
They've searched the ranch, they searched the trailer that he was living in, and they haven't found anything. They didn't find blood. They didn't find hair.
His case may have been shaky, but the Elko County District Attorney didn't seem worried during opening arguments. The prosecutor presented the theory that Linda killed Jerry Polinsky after he discovered she had cleaned out his retirement account.
The motive was that he had confronted her and she decided he needed to be eliminated.
Detectives theorized that since Linda had Jerry insured for $300,000, she couldn't hide the body.
The body needs to be found and ultimately investigated and resolved so that they can collect the life insurance.
They had taken the body to Salt Lake City and dumped the body into the Jordan River.
The defense, in its open, admitted the prosecution's theory sounded plausible. There was, however, one problem.
I promise you at the end of this case, you will not know the following. The state's own witnesses will testify they don't have a murder weapon. The state's own witnesses will testify they don't have any place of the murder. The state's own witnesses will testify they have no blood evidence.
But when the prosecutors started putting on their case, they did present more than theories. In fact, they had Linda herself on tape talking about the murder from jail.
When the inmates are in a cell block, there's a telephone in there that they can make outgoing calls. Every phone call is recorded.
On March 16th, prosecutors played the tapes for the jury.
It's very important that you do not talk or do not make Vern mad or make him pissed in any way, shape, or form. He'll bury me.
She gave you the impression that she knew exactly what had happened and that she was still controlling everyone and everything while she was in jail.
In other conversations, Linda had apparently even tried to get Vern to take the fall for her.
You definitely walk on a self-defense. Over there, not here. A bad fishing trick. I know that.
But while the police did have Linda on tape apparently trying to coax a confession out of Vern, they didn't have a confession from her.
She never came out and said it. She never once did that in the many, many hours and hours of telephone conversations that were recorded.
On March 22nd, a week into the trial, Linda took the stand in her own defense. She told the jury the calls were taken out of context, as was her handling of Jerry's finances. She explained that Jerry had authorized her to take money from his retirement account to pay outstanding debts.
Why did she take the stand? Because her story was true. She didn't have anything to do with his disappearance, and she hadn't anything to do with his death.
But what about the insurance policy? On the stand, Linda claimed she hadn't even known that she was the beneficiary until after Jerry's death.
She's contacted by the CUNA insurance people who indicate to her that she's been named as the beneficiary on a life insurance policy. At that time, she doesn't know the size of that policy.
In closing, Linda's attorney argued that prosecutors had not shown the jury any proof that Linda had killed Jerry Polinsky.
You have to show something other than motive. You have to show evidence that suggests the person was involved in the perpetration of the crime. You got to have some facts.
I couldn't see how 12 ordinary people on the jury, could believe with a reasonable doubt that she did this.
On March 26th, the jury announced its verdict.
We have the jury duly empaneled to try the defendant, Linda Marie Fields, who hereby find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder.